Hi, everyone. Ron Gerber, CEO of Angelbeat. So glad to have Marco Marquez, and hopefully my New York accent didn't mispronounce that. Marco is one of the top Google Cloud engineers. He's got a wealth of experience. He's worked for many years successfully at IBM, recently joined Google, I guess maybe not so recently, about 3.5, 4 years ago. And I thought in this nice, informative video blog, Marco could first share with his background, and I thought as a starting point, it would be good to have him speak about why he decided to join Google right at the start of the pandemic, not an easy switch. And I think his thinking and decision making might be useful to end users out there within the Angelbeat community who are grappling with, okay, why should I potentially move my workloads onto the Google Cloud? It's a similar decision making process to Marco deciding why should I switch my employer from IBM to Google. And so we'll start there. And maybe, Marco, you could share how have your expectations been met or exceeded over the last couple of years?
Sounds good. Thanks, Ron.
Okay.
I'm sure when you were a kid, you heard the story about like when someone offers you a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask where you're going. That was the way I felt when Google reached out.
Okay.
You think about like uh, at that moment, even that Google Cloud wasn't that big. It was 4 years ago. It was just starting to get attention. Google has had very good reputation on innovation and thinking big, right? Thinking the next big idea. And after a career of doing software development, managing software development teams, being part of the CI organization instead of IBM, managing large implementations with enterprise, I said, it's a very good opportunity to start looking at what else from two perspectives, what other customers are doing, what other companies are doing, what are the pain points. You tend to, when you work in a single company, you tend to see everything in one single
Yeah.
perspective. To see it from the other side, to see what else was happening, and then the second part is what ideas, what's coming from this innovation engine that is Google itself. Right?
Well,
Um,
one thing I think is really interesting is that Google, as we were discussing, has 10 different business units from YouTube to Gmail to search to Android to photos and five others who support over 1 billion users every day. And we were talking, and this is interesting, why Google has been so successful ever since Marco arrived. You can probably, what he does is annual review, do a little correlation between Google's market share and cloud sales and when Marco joined them. But I think, it's very some analogous to what Amazon and AWS. AWS used to be a captive internal technology solution just supporting Amazon. Amazon, Jeff Bezos, to his credit, said, we need to offer these solutions to external customers. I'm sure the people at Google had a similar mindset thinking, well, we're already supporting 10 cloud business unit applications. And if we know how to support over 10 billion users a day, and it's probably closer to 15, remember, it's at least 1 billion on 10 separate platforms. I mean, can you imagine having the technology capabilities and expertise to support that level? Surely there is a great deal of expertise that can then be deployed to external customers. That was the thinking in Google. It's also been the driver why Google has hired so many talented individuals like Marco and why they've now emerged as one of the top three cloud providers. And again, I mean, there's no secret there's AWS, Microsoft, and Google, but there's pretty much no one else within the Western world, putting aside companies like Alibaba and Tencent in China. So how has it been over the last couple of years riding that rocket ship for you?
Yeah, it's going back to our mission is to organize the world information and make it available. We say, well, we have done that successfully for the end users. All the products that you mentioned are especially
Yeah.
for end customers. And we have the experience how to run how to run data centers, how to run them efficiently, how to run them in a secure manner. And we say, well, how do we use that story to reach out to customers on the enterprise world and say, we can help you run your workloads in order to support billions of users. Funny enough, sometimes some of the customers that I have, they don't have billions of users, and they're like, well, we don't want to run a billion. We don't run a few hundreds or a few millions. But you start from somewhere, right? So
Yeah,
at the end of the day, the architectural decisions and the top process of how to run a massive scale environment, if you start with those good practices from the beginning, makes it easier to scale on the long run.
sure.
Especially during COVID, that was one of the things that we noticed is it was the moment where a lot of companies were it was two part of the process in the economy, right? One of them is the it seemed like everything is going online, so let's go online, and it was a peak and across all cloud providers, across all of the online services to like we need to beef up our infrastructure on cloud to be able to scale and reach out to customers where we didn't have before, right? So we saw a lot of demand from different areas, from the retail, from SaaS services, and so on, to like make sure that they have presence and availability in the cloud. And then the second half of the pandemic, which is probably after 2022 and the last year, is like they build all these services in the cloud, and they're starting to optimize to understand, based on the economy, where are we going, be more mindful on how the spend is going. So they're starting to optimize. So we're seeing a story of three steps. One is like, and we usually see that as in every customer, regardless of where the year is, they usually go to the same. We just saw it like very compacted in a couple of years, right? So one of them is you start your services, you start growing, right? So you're typically, a lot of the customers that we see is they start building stuff in the cloud. They don't think about much about the bill until it's starting to get very hot, right? And what happens is people get excited, they start building projects and so on, and then at some point they start losing track or losing control on their expenses, and then it goes to the next part of the picture where they say like, oh, the cloud is expensive. I could run this way more efficient on my data centers, and that's where we have to help them understand like, well, you have to run whatever you're doing, you have to run an efficient way, you have to find the right products for
Yeah,
you. Just because they're available, you doesn't mean you're going to use everything. And we have created programs like the FinOps, where we work with customers to understand where's your spend going, how to create budgets, how to redirect some of the budget to innovation, right? And have a better sense of control, or like how much I'm spending and how to do it in an effective
yeah.
way.
That's a good point, because even as the stock market booms, everyone is still under significant pressures to deliver profits, to deliver results. And I know one of the things that I've heard from many of the people who attend Angelbeat events, it's great that Google has hired people like Marco who can help them do the pre-sales configuration, the application architecture to figure out what's out there. So there's no surprises when you get the bill at the end of the month. And I think that goes a lot to what Google's forte is. And maybe you can comment a little more about this, where Google is often used in a multi-cloud environment, where organizations will move workloads from either Azure or AWS onto Google. And when you go through that process, there's not only a technology dimension that Marco and his team have to deal with, there's the FinOps, there's the financial dimensions, where the IT folks looking at this saying, it's good. We know Google's got this reputation for security, reliability, et cetera, et cetera. But you can also help them architect it so you're not necessarily just giving every person a chance to set up a VM in the cloud and suddenly do test and prototyping and making sure that things are properly managed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, definitely, by being the third cloud in the run, we realize that there are definitely companies. We need to meet the companies where they are, right? It's some companies, they have a lot of data centers that are still on-prem. Some others are on other cloud providers, and it will be naive from us to say we want you to run and deploy, replace everything in one shot
Yeah.
to move with us. So we usually work with identify what are the areas or the use cases that make sense. And for the one that doesn't make sense, you can keep it on your cloud, keep it on your data center, and make sure you just move the ones that are going to help you either innovate or move to where your customers are. Um, and that's going back to my point, is like the three stages, right? The first one is grow at no cost in a way, then is optimize and make sure you run it in an efficient way.
Yeah.
The third one is the innovation part, where it's like, now that I have an environment running is very efficient, how can I use technology to do the 10x thinking,
Yeah.
right? And that 10x thinking is what I personally like when I go and talk to customers. I say, this is what we do, this is what we see at Google. Here's another perspective, right? Here's a different way of seeing it. And with that goes along with, if you're going to be doing something on AI, how can you move certain data? How can you move just a few pieces to start doing innovation without having to replace your whole environment in one shot?
Yeah, I could see that. And you raised two good points there. The first is when organizations are looking for the right transition approach, they can tap into the expertise that Google has in building out data centers. Where do you locate them? If you're a major, Mark and I are both in the New York City area. If you deal with some of the world's preeminent financial services firms who might have global operations, quite literally, the speed of light matters when you are dealing with data that might have to go in real time between New York and London and Singapore and various financial centers. And these very sophisticated Wall Street trading algorithms, if they can get information a couple of nanoseconds earlier, it makes a huge difference with the software they have. So I think, I'm sure a lot of the organizations may say, well, I don't have anything that sophisticated, but the fact that Google has this incredibly reliable, secure infrastructure gives your clients the confidence to know, okay, like if it's good enough for the world's biggest banks, I'm sure it's going to be good enough for me. And if it's good enough to ensure that there aren't outages on YouTube and Gmail and Google search and my Android phones and the Google Play, that's I think the same strategy, quite honestly, that one of your major competitors in the e-commerce world says, if we support AWS supporting Amazon, it's a similar mindset that if we at Google Cloud are supporting all these apps, you can be pretty confident that your apps are going to have the same security, the same infrastructure that powers Gmail is going to power you as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you mentioned. So most of our products on security are usually cloud agnostic in a way, or they can run on different clouds. So you can have network monitoring on your own cloud or in your own data center, and it's powered by Google. You have Mandiant services where you can do threat detection and identification of what's happening. Um, we have different solutions to monitor or to use data without moving the data. You just basically connect and access to it. But then again, it's all based on customer needs, right? If you need to really run stuff locally, and your data center is doing it very well with the right speed, we don't want to move that, right? You can focus. You can just take a snapshot, move certain data just to do the innovation part, and then you plug it back in.
Now,
Yeah.
one of the things you mentioned was about AI, which is the big buzzword of the year, everything going on. I know Google's invested several billion in Anthropic and other platforms. And in a sense, Google's been at the forefront of machine learning, AI automation. I mean, you can look at something now, it seems trivial, but when you type in a search, Google, before you finish typing, knows what you're looking for. And, it's that kind of mindset. And I think, I'd like to hear more about what Google is doing in AI as I look at it as an outsider. Well, building AI models, dealing with LLMs, large language models, is somewhat analogous to all the expertise that Google has built in creating its search engine, which again has to catalog information and then simplistically, you still have to train your search results to respond to prompts by individuals like myself doing search. And, from a 30,000-foot view, that's pretty much what all the generative AI is doing is searching the internet, getting lots of information, and then training your responses. Obviously, it has to be more sophisticated than just a search results. Now it's trying to write documents, create videos, but maybe you could share how Google's expertise in search and having these 10 billion platforms, having a great appreciation for data security, data privacy, understanding issues around data locality, how that plays into Google, which will undoubtedly emerge as one of the leaders and players in generative AI. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so definitely. And by the way, I want to disclose I'm not an expert on Gen AI, but I can tell you what we know. And
Sure.
the first part of this, like the best analogy that I heard about generative AI, especially when companies start adopting it, is think about you just hire someone fresh out of college, right? That person has certain knowledge, has an ability to learn certain things and to practice. But at the end of the day, you're not going to assign one of the most difficult use cases to that person that just came out of college, right? You're going to
Yeah.
go to training, you're going to go to sharing the manual or the company policies and so on. So that concept of training and refining the training of your models is the same thing as you basically get the technology that has the ability to learn. It has certain corpus of information, and you want to train them to something very specific to your environment. The way we are handling it, it's we have what we call foundational models. Think about like Gemini for multimodal. We think about like Bison for text and conversations or images. You take that model, you create a copy of it on your own environment, and then you train it on top of it with your own data. That's a different approach than anybody else, because that way you are creating a copy of fairly well trained model, but then you're refining it with your own information, and you can start adding the discovery and the search capabilities to ground and model in some factual data. Right? A lot of the
And
challenges in AI, especially in Gen AI, is the hallucinations, and it's like the model making up stuff because, in a way, it makes sense from a, the way if you know how an LLM works, it's all statistics, right? It's just
yeah,
probability, trying to find what's the next word that will make sense in a sentence. But sometimes they have no context, they have no specific meaning or source. So the way we're doing is you have your model, you can get a copy, you train it with your own information, and then you use search and discovery to find in the ground references. So when the time it comes out with like a specific summary, it says, I found this information on this place. This has better explainability as opposed to just say, well, this is what I found.
interesting. So you raised two good points there. The first is when I talk to people about Gen AI, they're worried about, well, I don't want to train models and help my competitors. So the way you're describing that Gen AI architecture, you've got the benefits of Google, but you've also got the ability to control and protect your own usage and training of that model. So you make it better, but you're making your private customized version of that better so it works for you and not your competitors. Is that a
That's
correct
correct.
summary?
Yes, you're creating your own copy in your own environment. You train it with your own data, but the benefit here is one of the most expensive part is to train with a large corpus of information. That's what we took care already with the foundational models. So now you just train on the additional information you want to add in terms of like your company policies or certain compliance documents, certain images that you want the model to understand, and that's all your information, is all your PI,
Got it.
and it's all protected by you. So that makes we have no way to see it and no way to share it with anybody else.
Excellent. One other thing I think might be interesting as we finish up this informative talk, good to hear about AI, good to hear about the Google Cloud history, is maybe talk about some customer examples, how you work with your clients, how you take advantage of tools like Anthos to make this multi-cloud environment more easily managed. Could you talk about a couple of scenarios on why your clients decided to then go with the Google Cloud and how relatively easy that transition implementation process was?
Yeah, I can tell you a couple of examples without saying the actual
Sure.
company names. One of them is I work with tech companies usually. So most of them are either individual service vendors. That means they have a solution that they host in multiple cloud providers. And just by definition of that, we have to work with them to understand what are the most common products or most common solutions that they will be able to deploy in
Okay.
multiple clouds without having to rewrite a lot. So those are the specific scenarios where we work together with them on understanding almost feature capabilities, availability on certain regions, and make sure that the most common denominator is available, so they can deploy in 3 clouds, 4 clouds, and so on. The second one is more like tech companies that either started on one of our competitors, or they have certain workloads with one of our competitors, but they want to take advantage of the Gen AI capabilities or the
Okay.
BigQuery, right? So with them, we start working with a first, they misdefine the cost of transferring data across clouds, because yes, it's expensive. You use the internet, but there are ways to use private connections between, let's say, AWS and Google Cloud or Azure, and you pay a relatively small amount. It goes through the private network, so it's more secure. And then you have a way to control how much information you want to transfer between clouds to do the analysis that you want. One of my customers, it's is doing a lot of AI on Google Cloud, and then the rest of like their applications are running on AWS.
Yeah.
So they basically have engines that aggregate certain information from AWS, they transfer it over to Google Cloud, and then we use something like BigQuery Omni or Big Lake, where basically our products set up to use data from other cloud providers or other places and run a query like as if you were doing it on Google Cloud.
Okay.
That makes it so much easier. So that way they build the models, they train them, everything is running on Google Cloud, and then they built a deployable model that they can deploy on AWS on GPUs, they can deploy with us on GPUs or
Yeah.
some other clouds.
Now,
So
I bet it's also very beneficial because I think Google owns like a couple of 100,000 miles of fiber and is one of the largest carriers. And so they can control the transmission of data, which provides some financial benefits and some greater security.
yeah, the Google network. I mean, you could search it, and yes, it's one of the largest networks. It has the ability to redirect traffic, especially when you're receiving a DDoS attack. Think about like sometimes it's 2 terabytes of information just in one shot. We can easily redirect it to somewhere else without affecting your websites. That's because of the capabilities of the network. So yes, that gives you the ability to have a private network in a secure way and have better control on the spends because it's not going through the internet. You don't have to pay that
Sure.
additional flow just because of trying to connect data between different clouds.
Well, I'm looking forward to your presenting at additional Angelbeat events later this year. Fascinating to hear about your career transition. It looks like getting on that rocket ship has been a very good career, professional experience, greater knowledge, as well as tapping into your experience. We'll look forward to hearing you present at Angelbeat and sharing some additional stories of how Google is emerging in this AI centric multi cloud world and building on its strengths. And who knows? I'm sure maybe the next time we do another one of these, there's going to be 11 or 12 different Google platforms that have over 1 billion users each, which is, as I say that out loud, it's just a mind boggling statistic. And I guess the key takeaway for everyone listening to all this, and I tell this to people, you have to give Google very fair and serious consideration in your cloud architecture. If for no other reason, they've got so much expertise. And as I said, it's maybe unlikely that your site is going to be hit with a DDoS attack, but it's pretty good to know that if someone tries to take out, like what happened in the Colonial Pipeline a couple of years ago, that took out the entire East Coast, with the advantage of that Google architecture that's been created to support 10 billion user platforms, the Google users are unaffected because Google can reroute your application. And you're probably a lot smaller. There aren't that many organizations that have 1 billion users, but it's good to know that the technology you're selecting has that resource capabilities built in.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Marco? I think
No, I mean, I'm happy to participate in other sessions. I can reach out to some of my customers if they wanna. We're gonna do a session together if you want. That would be a
absolutely.
good like use case scenario where we. I have one in mind where we're using. They're taking advantage of the Gen AI capabilities and put them on their own product. So yeah, maybe after April, because they're gonna announce something in April, so we can wait
That's
after
right.
that and do a session with them.
So one of the things we're going to have Marco present at Angelbeat in May, giving an update on the Google Next conference, which is their annual global shindig, for lack of a better term, where they just talk about all these new things. And for those of you who can't make it, we'll look forward to hearing Marco and hopefully with a customer summarize that at Angelbeat in May. Thanks so much, Marco. This was great.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ron.